You think spiritual growth requires decades of practice, endless meditation, and perfect discipline. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that shatters this belief completely. What he found was so powerful, so immediate, that it transformed lives in moments, not years. This secret remained hidden in his advanced teachings. The secret is this: you are not seeking God or healing or abundance. You are the very consciousness through which God expresses itself. The moment you stop trying to get something from the spiritual realm and recognize you are the spiritual realm expressing as you, everything changes instantly. Most spiritual seekers spend years begging, pleading, and working to achieve what they already are. Goldsmith realized that consciousness doesn't need to be attained, improved, or healed. It needs to be recognized. You don't become spiritual. You recognize you never stopped being pure spirit having a temporary human experience. This recognition isn't intellectual understanding. It's a felt knowing that dissolves the illusion of separation between you and your source. When this hits you, problems don't get solved. They simply cease to exist in your awareness because you realize they were never real in the first place. Goldsmith called this recognition dying daily to the personal sense of self. Not literal death, but the death of believing you are a limited human seeking help from a distant God. This death is actually the most liberating experience possible. It's returning home to who you've always been. When you truly grasp that there is no separation between consciousness and its expression as you, seeking stops. Struggle stops. The need for healing stops because you realize there was never anything wrong with the real you. What seemed broken was just a mistaken identity. This isn't positive thinking or affirmations. This is the recognition of what already is. You don't create abundance, health, or peace. You recognize these as your natural state when the false belief in limitation dissolves. They were never absent, only hidden by the lie of separation. The transformation happens the instant this recognition becomes real for you. Not tomorrow, not after more spiritual work, but now. In this moment, you can let go of the seeking self and know yourself as consciousness itself, whole and perfect, and expressing as your life. Here's what happens when this recognition becomes real instead of just an idea. Sarah, a student of Goldsmith's teachings, had been struggling with chronic pain for 12 years. Doctors offered no solutions. She had tried every spiritual practice, every healer, every technique. Then one morning during meditation, it hit her. She wasn't Sarah seeking healing. She was consciousness experiencing itself as Sarah. The pain belonged to the false identity, not to consciousness. In that moment of recognition, the pain simply wasn't there anymore. Not healed, just absent. She didn't fight the pain, pray it away, or visualize health. She recognized that consciousness, her true identity, cannot experience pain or limitation. The body that seemed separate from consciousness was revealed as consciousness expressing itself in form. Perfect form. This wasn't a medical miracle requiring explanation. This was consciousness recognizing itself and dissolving the false belief that it could be limited, damaged, or separated from its own perfection. When the lie disappears, only truth remains. The key is understanding that consciousness isn't something you have, like a tool or a possession. Consciousness is what you are. You don't use consciousness to solve problems. You recognize that problems exist only in the false belief that you are something other than consciousness itself. When Goldsmith said, "I can of my own self do nothing," he wasn't expressing weakness. He was revealing the secret. The personal self that struggles and seeks and suffers doesn't exist. Only consciousness exists, appearing as infinite expressions, including the one called you. This recognition dissolves the root of all problems, the belief in separation. Not separation between people, but the fundamental separation between consciousness and its expression. When this false belief dies, what remains is perfect being expressing itself perfectly as your life. Stop trying to improve your life. Start recognizing that life itself is consciousness appearing as you. This recognition is available right now in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or history or spiritual background. You already are what you've been seeking. Michael had lost everything in a business collapse. His marriage ended, his house was foreclosed, and depression consumed him. He discovered Goldsmith's teachings during his darkest period, and something clicked immediately. Instead of seeing himself as a failed businessman, he began recognizing himself as consciousness itself. This wasn't denial of his circumstances. This was recognition that consciousness, his true nature, cannot fail, be divorced, or lose anything. The circumstances belonged to a false identity that never actually existed. What he really was remained untouched by any external condition. Within 3 months, opportunities began appearing effortlessly. Not through hard work or positive thinking, but through the natural expression of consciousness recognizing itself. A new business emerged, relationships healed, and abundance flowed not because he made it happen, but because he stopped believing it could be absent. The transformation came from within, not from changing external conditions, but from recognizing that his true self was never touched by any condition. When the false identity died, consciousness expressed itself naturally as success, love, and abundance. Linda struggled with anxiety that controlled her life for 20 years. She couldn't leave her house without panic attacks. Traditional therapy helped, but never eliminated the root fear. When she discovered this Goldsmith principle, everything shifted in ways she never imagined possible. She stopped trying to heal Linda's anxiety and started recognizing that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be anxious. Anxiety belonged to the false identity that believed it was separate from its source. Consciousness is naturally peaceful, complete, and fearless because it knows no separation. The first time she left her house after this recognition, something was different. Not because the anxiety was healed, but because there was no one there to be anxious. Consciousness experiencing itself as Linda cannot be threatened because it knows its own eternal, invincible nature. This wasn't gradual improvement. This was instant transformation through recognition of what was already true. The anxiety didn't go away. It was revealed as never having belonged to her real identity in the first place. Robert's relationship with his father had been broken for 15 years. Resentment, anger, and hurt defined every interaction. He tried forgiveness techniques, therapy, and spiritual counseling. Nothing created lasting peace until he encountered this deeper truth about identity. Instead of Robert trying to forgive his father, consciousness recognized itself expressing as both Robert and his father. How can consciousness be angry at itself? How can pure awareness be in conflict with its own expression? The relationship problems belong to false identities, not to their true nature. When Robert next saw his father, something had fundamentally shifted. Not because his father changed, but because Robert was no longer there as a separate self that could be hurt or offended. Only consciousness was present, expressing itself as love, understanding, and peace. The healing was immediate and complete, not because they worked through their issues, but because the separate selves that had issues were recognized as illusions. What remained was consciousness loving itself through both expressions. These aren't isolated cases or special people with unusual spiritual gifts. This is the natural result of recognizing what you actually are instead of who you think you are. Every problem, every limitation, every struggle belongs to a false identity that consciousness has never actually assumed. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the main recognition, Goldsmith taught specific practices to deepen this understanding. The first is what he called the pause. Throughout your day, pause and ask, who is having this experience? Not what should I do about this situation, but who is actually here having this experience? When you look for the one having the experience, you'll discover something remarkable. There's no separate person there. There's only consciousness being aware of whatever is appearing. The pause breaks the hypnosis of believing you are the character in the story instead of the awareness in which the story appears. Practice this pause, especially during challenging moments. When fear arises, pause and look for the one who is afraid. When anger appears, pause and search for the angry person. When lack seems real, pause and find the one who lacks something. You won't find anyone there. What you'll find is consciousness itself, naturally peaceful, complete, and whole, watching these experiences come and go like clouds in an empty sky. The clouds don't disturb the sky, and experiences don't disturb consciousness. The second practice Goldsmith emphasized was impersonal meditation. Instead of meditating to get something or fix yourself, sit in recognition that you are consciousness itself, having no problems to solve, nothing to attain, nowhere to go. Don't try to stop thoughts or achieve special states. Simply rest as consciousness, knowing that whatever appears in your awareness is consciousness expressing itself. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, sounds, all consciousness appearing to itself as temporary experiences. This isn't concentration or visualization. This is relaxation into what you actually are. Like space relaxing as space, not trying to become space. You don't become consciousness through meditation. You recognize you never stopped being consciousness, having various experiences. Regular practice of this recognition meditation dissolves the habit of identifying as the temporary experiences and strengthens the knowing of yourself as the permanent consciousness in which all experiences appear and disappear. The third complementary practice is living from the recognition. Instead of applying this truth only during meditation or spiritual study, bring this recognition into daily activities. As you work, recognize that consciousness is working through you. As you speak, know that consciousness is communicating itself. When problems appear, instead of immediately trying to solve them from the level of personal effort, pause and recognize, consciousness is having this experience. What wants to be expressed here? Often, solutions appear effortlessly because consciousness naturally expresses itself as wisdom and right action. This isn't bypassing practical responsibility. This is fulfilling responsibility from your true nature instead of from fear, lack, or separation. Actions taken from consciousness carry a different quality. They're more effective, less stressful, and aligned with what serves everyone. Living from this recognition transforms ordinary activities into expressions of consciousness recognizing itself. Work becomes service, relationships become love in action, and challenges become opportunities for consciousness to demonstrate its infinite creativity. The fourth supportive practice Goldsmith taught was dissolving the sense of otherness. Every time you see someone as separate from consciousness, you reinforce the illusion of your own separation. Every time you judge, resist, or fear another, you strengthen the false identity. Instead, practice seeing everyone as consciousness expressing itself uniquely, not good consciousness or bad consciousness, just consciousness appearing as infinite variety. The person who seems difficult, the situation that feels threatening, the circumstance that appears limiting, all consciousness appearing to itself. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or avoiding necessary boundaries. It means recognizing that consciousness itself is living as all expressions while maintaining its essential nature as love, wisdom, and wholeness. When otherness dissolves, your own sense of separation dissolves with it. You can't see unity everywhere else while maintaining separation for yourself. As the world becomes consciousness expressing itself, you naturally recognize yourself as that same consciousness expressing uniquely as you. The most common obstacle people encounter is thinking this recognition should eliminate all human experiences. They expect that recognizing consciousness means never feeling sad, never facing challenges, never dealing with practical concerns. This misunderstanding creates frustration and doubt. Consciousness expresses itself through infinite experiences, including human emotions and circumstances. The recognition doesn't eliminate the human experience. It eliminates the suffering that comes from believing you are the human experience instead of consciousness having the human experience. You can feel sadness without being a sad person. You can face challenges without being a struggling person. You can deal with practical concerns without being a limited person. The experiences flow through consciousness without disturbing its essential peace and completeness. The goal isn't to become a robot without feelings. The goal is to recognize feelings as temporary experiences moving through consciousness, like weather moving through sky. The sky remains unchanged regardless of what weather passes through it. Another common obstacle is expecting others to understand or validate this recognition. Family, friends, and colleagues may not resonate with this perspective. Some may actively resist or criticize it. This can create doubt about the validity of your own recognition. Remember that consciousness doesn't require external validation. Your recognition of what you are stands independent of anyone else's opinion or understanding. You don't need permission to know yourself as consciousness, and you don't need agreement to live from this recognition. Continue expressing love, kindness, and wisdom regardless of others' responses. Sometimes the most powerful teaching is simply being the peace that you recognize yourself to be. Let your life demonstrate the fruits of this recognition, rather than trying to convince anyone through words. Trust your own experience. If this recognition brings peace, clarity, and natural wisdom into your life, that's all the validation you need. Truth doesn't become more true when others agree with it, and it doesn't become less true when others reject it. A third major obstacle is the tendency to make this recognition into another spiritual practice to perfect. The mind wants to turn this into something you do rather than something you recognize. It wants to measure progress, track improvements, and create goals around consciousness. But consciousness isn't something you practice or improve. It's what you are. You can't become better at being consciousness, only clearer in recognizing consciousness as your identity. There's nothing to perfect because consciousness is already perfect, complete, and whole. When you catch yourself trying to work on this recognition or improve your understanding of it, simply return to the basic knowing. I am consciousness itself having this experience. Not I will become consciousness, or I need to understand consciousness better, but I am consciousness now. This eliminates the spiritual ego that wants to achieve enlightenment or become more conscious. You can't become what you already are. You can only recognize what you've never stopped being. The final common obstacle is fear that this recognition is somehow selfish, arrogant, or disconnected from reality. Some worry that knowing themselves as consciousness means ignoring other people's suffering or avoiding practical responsibilities in the world. Actually, the opposite occurs. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, you simultaneously recognize everyone else as the same consciousness expressing uniquely. This naturally generates compassion, understanding, and appropriate action to serve wherever needed. You become more engaged with life, not less. But your engagement comes from love and wisdom rather than fear and obligation. You respond to situations from consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, rather than from a separate self trying to fix or control outcomes. This recognition doesn't make you special or superior. It reveals what everyone actually is, whether they recognize it or not. You're not different from others. You're simply awake to what you all share as your common essence and true identity. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced integration begins when this recognition becomes your default way of experiencing life, rather than something you remember occasionally. David, a corporate executive, found himself naturally operating from consciousness during high-pressure meetings and difficult negotiations. Instead of stress and competitive thinking, he found himself accessing solutions that served everyone involved, not through strategy or manipulation, but through consciousness expressing itself as wisdom and creative problem-solving. His career transformed as colleagues began seeking his perspective on complex issues. He didn't change his job or abandon his responsibilities. He fulfilled them from a completely different source. Consciousness working through David generated better results with less effort because it naturally aligns with what serves the highest good for all involved. This integration happened gradually over months. Not because the recognition took time to develop, but because old habits of thinking and reacting needed time to dissolve. As they dissolved, consciousness expressed itself more freely through his daily activities. Maria, a mother of 3 young children, discovered that parenting from consciousness created profound shifts in her family dynamics. Instead of reactive parenting based on fear, control, or exhaustion, she found herself responding to each situation from wisdom and unconditional love. Her children began exhibiting more peaceful behavior, not because she controlled them differently, but because consciousness expressing through her naturally created an atmosphere of safety and understanding. Problems that used to create family conflict simply resolved themselves. This wasn't perfect parenting or the absence of normal family challenges. This was meeting every situation from consciousness rather than from a stressed, overwhelmed mother identity. The situations remained, the quality of response transformed completely. She realized that the best gift she could give her children wasn't perfect circumstances, but the demonstration of living from peace, wisdom, and love. They absorbed this way of being naturally, learning to access their own inner peace during difficult moments. James, facing serious financial difficulties, applied this recognition in the most practical way possible. Instead of panicking about money or working frantically to solve the crisis, he rested in knowing himself as consciousness, which lacks nothing and needs nothing. This wasn't denial of practical concerns or avoiding necessary action. This was taking action from consciousness rather than from fear and desperation. Opportunities, resources, and solutions appeared in ways he never could have planned or forced. A former colleague offered unexpected consulting work. An old debt was repaid without him even requesting it. New income streams emerged from talents he'd forgotten he possessed, not through manifestation techniques, but through consciousness expressing itself naturally as abundance. The financial situation improved steadily over several months, but more importantly, his relationship with security and abundance transformed permanently. He learned to live from the natural abundance of consciousness rather than from fear of lack. Rachel, dealing with a serious health diagnosis, discovered that relating to her condition from consciousness rather than from fear created space for natural healing to occur. She didn't deny medical reality or avoid treatment. She received treatment from consciousness rather than from a frightened patient identity. Her entire healthcare experience transformed. Doctors remarked on her unusual peace and clarity during a difficult treatment process. Her body responded better to treatment than expected. Her recovery exceeded medical predictions, though she focused on consciousness expressing itself as healing rather than on outcomes. She realized that consciousness, her true nature, cannot be genuinely threatened by any condition. Bodies change, circumstances shift, but consciousness remains eternally healthy, whole, and complete. This knowing permeated her cells and supported her healing process. Whether physical healing occurred or not, she had found something more valuable, the recognition that her essential self was completely untouched by any physical condition. This peace became more precious than any external healing. The ultimate stage of this recognition is when it becomes so natural that you forget you ever believed you were something other than consciousness. Like forgetting you ever believed the earth was flat once you clearly see its roundness from space. At this stage, problems still appear, but they're like movies on a screen. The movie may show drama, conflict, or challenge, but the screen remains unaffected. You respond appropriately to whatever appears without identifying as the characters in the story. This isn't detachment or spiritual bypassing. This is full engagement from your true nature rather than from false identity. Actions become more effective, relationships become more authentic, and life becomes more aligned with wisdom and love. You realize this recognition was never about becoming something new. It was about remembering something ancient, eternal, and ever-present. The consciousness that you have always been and can never stop being. Living from this recognition doesn't make you perfect or eliminate all human experiences. You still face practical challenges, experience emotions, and navigate relationships. But all of this happens within consciousness rather than as consciousness trying to solve problems. The difference is profound. Instead of a separate self struggling with life, there's consciousness experiencing itself as infinite expressions. Some expressions appear pleasant, others challenging, but all are recognized as temporary experiences within eternal awareness. This recognition brings natural humility, because you realize everyone is consciousness appearing uniquely. It brings natural compassion because you see everyone facing the same fundamental misidentification. It brings natural wisdom because consciousness expresses itself as understanding. You become a beneficial presence wherever you go, not through effort or spiritual techniques, but through the natural radiation of consciousness recognizing itself. Peace, love, and wisdom express through you because that's what you actually are. The most advanced practitioners of this recognition discover they can no longer find the boundary between their individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Not through merger or achievement, but through recognizing there never was a boundary to begin with. This isn't loss of individuality. This is recognition that individuality is how consciousness expresses its infinite creativity. You remain unique while knowing your essence as the same consciousness appearing as everyone and everything. At this stage, service becomes natural because serving others is consciousness serving itself through apparent separation. Love becomes effortless because loving others is consciousness loving itself in all its expressions. You realize this journey was never about personal enlightenment. It was about consciousness recognizing itself everywhere, dissolving the illusion of separation that creates all suffering. Your recognition contributes to the awakening of consciousness in all its expressions. This secret that Joel Goldsmith protected and revealed to advanced students is now yours. Not as information to understand, but as recognition to live from. You are consciousness itself appearing as your unique expression. Never separate from your source, eternally whole and complete. Every problem you've ever faced existed only in the belief that you were something other than consciousness. Every limitation you've experienced belonged to a false identity that consciousness never actually assumed. The real you has always been free, peaceful, and abundant. This recognition is available right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances or spiritual background. Stop seeking what you already are. Start living from the consciousness that you have never stopped being. Let this be the moment your seeking ends and your authentic life begins. Your transformation isn't a future goal. It's a present recognition. You are consciousness itself, expressing uniquely as you, eternally connected to the infinite source of all life. This has always been true. Now you know it. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.